Hello everyone and welcome to another News Coulomb video. I'm trying something a little bit new here. You know, my indoor studio, it's been hot. It's been hot and yeah, I'm working on the update to the News Coulomb Charging Site review checklist, rubric, matrix, and I've been using a screen capture. I already recorded this one time. It was well over an hour, so hopefully we can maybe speed run through it a second time. I've been doing a screen capture, and it's just a little bit easier to remember all of the points. And I finished editing it, and so I'm going through the final edited site review checklist. There's also a corresponding article on the newsletter that I'm publishing on Substack. I'm sorry, my office mates here are a little bit of a pain. I'm borrowing their studio, and they're ripping me to shreds over, I guess, is the Kitties and Kilowatts podcast. But yeah, so I'm just using some on-screen software just to capture. I guess I could, in theory, do this as a live stream, but I think baby steps, one step at a time. And I just wanted to go through because I have updated the site review checklist, site review model, and I just wanted to go over what those changes are and what I feel like is the best way of updating with very minimal changes to the actual checklist itself, right? So let's just dive right into it. Is this thing on? Is this thing on? So this is the News Coulomb site review checklist. This is the edit view. I've added a section. So I just went ahead and put version, 2025. So that's the decade, or is it the year? 9, and then 2, I guess, was the last point at which I was editing it. I think the 2nd of September. I don't think so. I think that was old. I think maybe that was actually supposed to be the 12th. I'm just going to put that there. Doesn't really matter. But yeah, so I guess to start off with, this is actually a Google form now that is collecting responses, and it will also take the email, and then it will just populate a Google Sheet with all of the data that is being gathered here. So one of my, I guess, key hallmark positions that I don't really want to adjust on is that I'm only ever going to do a site review for a site that I have personally visited and used. That means the site needs to be up and running, and it means that I need to have physically gone there and checked out the site myself. And part of this too is there's a familiarity that's necessary in order to complete the site review. So I could share this out, right? The link to this form out, and I might do that at some point. Right now, it's been fairly limited in terms of who I've been getting responses from. But it is certainly possible that we could just open it up to the community, and then maybe just figure out a way that we can publish these broader, maybe pips on a Google map or some other way of disseminating these site reviews. Because like I said, I mean, I'm just one person. I can only visit so many sites. But that is just sort of the standard expectation. Now, just starting off is just some basic information gathering, just so we're all on the same page about what site is being reviewed. Obviously it's going to collect the email of whoever submitted it as well. But the charging site owner operator, and this can get a little bit muddled. one example of this that I've seen recently is with like Electric Era and Sky Charger, where one is technically a back end and installer, and even then they have subcontractors, while the other is actually the CPO who owns most of the sites. So it's just really how it's being listed. Charging site address is just the physical address. If you wanted to visit it, we should be able to know where it's located. And then of course the plug share link is optional. I guess in theory there are sites that haven't been added to plug share, or even if they have, this is just a good common reference point that sort of everybody has access to. It's web-based. It's not specific to a provider or their website or anything else. And then I guess maybe even more importantly, the comments, the photos, almost all of that is community driven, which is kind of similar to what this charging site review checklist is meant to be doing. Now, section 1, for those of you familiar with my charging site review model, is access. And I just put these in alphabetical order. There's no importance necessarily. It's just that access starts with an A, right? So, and this is mostly focused on just the ease of access, how to get in. Each one of these sections, these main sections, is 10 points. So it's a total of 50 base points for any charging site review. And it just worked out easier that way because that's essentially like a letter grade, right? You can, and anything that breaks down in denominations of 5 is something that you can use as an analog for a letter grade, right? And most charging sites with the older model, and maybe this will change with the update, most charging sites with the older model were really C sites, right? They're just barely above average, typically somewhere right around an average of about 7 out of 10 for each category, right? So this is meant to be challenging though, because we're still in the early phases of rollout of charging sites. So there's no expectation for charging site providers to be, hitting all of their marks, right? Those A+ sites are going to be far less frequent. And I just realized, spoiler alert, the total points right now is 60, and so we'll get to that. But yeah, so with access, not a whole lot changed here. The ADA compliant spaces, and that's almost become like a national requirement anyway. So it's pretty much a huge negative if there aren't already ADA compliant spaces, but at the same time, I wouldn't just take it for granted that they should be there. Pull-through stalls, this is one that I got a lot of flack on early on for calling out the need for pull-through stalls. And I saw the writing on the wall, right, is that we're eventually going to be having EVs that can tow, and you don't want charging sites that are limited to having to nose in or back in order to access a charging stall. That's just not an effective use of real estate when you're talking about setting up a charging site. Sure, a majority of people aren't towing a majority of the time, but having at least a few of these pull-through stalls, and it's not just about towing, it's about universality of access, right? Because we've seen this with proprietary charging sites where the cables are on one side or the other, and they really expect whoever's plugging in and charging there to have a vehicle that already matches the pre-design of that charging site. So pull-through stalls just seem like a basic standard. Next is effective cable management. And I wanted to call out the fact that yes, on the surface, this can also just be, is the system that they put in place effective? But more to the point, it's actually also if it's currently effective, right? And so I think just seeing the effective cable management system in place is nice, but I think we can also start to mark no a little bit more frequently when we see cables that are falling out because their hooks are broken or where the retention cables aren't still supporting. So when I say effective, it's not just did the CPO install effective cable management on the chargers, it's also did they maintain them, right? And that's not always a given. Parking enforcement against icing is pretty much just signage. Some states do have specific laws that allow people to be ticketed or towed if they're blocking chargers, and that includes EV owners who are parking in a charging stall and just using it as a parking stall rather than plugging in. And again, that can be a problem when we see like parking lots that are very busy and maybe people are just looking for a place to park and they have an EV, they have no interest in charging, but they want to be able to access the business or service, so they park in the EV charging stall. And so that this is just something you want to have at least signage, and then from you can work from there in terms of the enforcement. But as a baseline, that's basically what this is. Near the entrance to the site, this is mostly so that you don't get involved with the traffic ingress and egress from the location. Being close to the site means you can get in and out in an EV without necessarily driving through like heavily walked or trafficked areas, right? Like if you're near the entrance to a store, a lot of times you'll have to deal with pedestrians, and that can also compound how easy or difficult it is to get into or out of a charging site. But the sort of counter to that is you still want it to be near the site amenities or services. If the charging site is in the middle of nowhere in a very large parking lot, which we have seen from time to time, it means that you're walking literally across the parking lot to get to whatever services or businesses on site, and that's also not ideal. So you want it to be close enough to the businesses that they're accessible, but far enough away that you're not having to deal with, like I said, a lot of foot traffic, and then also being able to get in and out of the facility quickly. And sometimes you'll see this too, where someplace like some charging providers like Electrify America will actually split their charging site so the ADA compliant stalls are near the front, making access to the business much easier, and the rest of the charging site is much further out or closer to the entrance or exit to the actual facility. So it's certainly possible to get both points, right? And then near highway, interstate, or main thoroughfare, I've been adding highway here and even main thoroughfare for a city, right, or an interstate, just because these are valid travel corridors, and there's no reason to not give that access bonus, right? If you're traveling and all you have to do is turn right off the road to get to it, then that's actually a major benefit. Point of sale payment options. This is a standard in California, not necessarily the rest of the country yet. I think it should be, and I believe NEVI also requires it. And I get a lot of pushback on this, but I also hear from a lot of EV owners that there's app fatigue, that there's account fatigue. You don't necessarily want your payment, just sitting there with everybody, right? Like as it is right now, I think I have at least 4 or 5 different payment accounts set up with different charging providers, and that's enough, right? You don't really need more than that. And so being able to just pull in and say, this is my standard payment card, let me pay at the point of use, point of sale. That needs to be an option. And then, of course, being able to call in and activate, or use a web portal, and then of course plug and charge. And some people think that plug and charge is important enough. Maybe it should also be its own category, but again, it also requires an app and payment to be pre-set up before you can use it. If you only use a network once every 3 or 4 or 5 months, doesn't necessarily make that much sense to have a plug and charge account set up. And then sufficient stalls for the size or popularity. This is mostly just to do with, again, access. How easy is it to access a charger when you arrive? And so if it's an undersized, 2, 4, 6 stall site at a location that frequently has hundreds of people visiting, say something like a Buc-ee's, right, then that wouldn't be appropriate. But if the site matches the popularity and size of the location, then it should get a point here because it just makes access easier. Section 3 here is amenities, and it's really the second major category. And this is the one that I think gets the most emphasis. It's all the bells and whistles, things like that. First question here is just about the canopy or covering for chargers. Again, I got a lot of pushback on this, especially from CPOs and things like, oh, it's not really necessary. But really all I'm looking for here is equal treatment between EV owners and gas car, right, and internal combustion vehicle drivers, where they have canopies or coverings for the gas pumps. It makes sense to have them for the chargers. And I think what gets missed here is people say, oh, well, you're not out in the weather because you don't need to be standing there holding the cable like you do for a gas pump. And that is true. That is fair and that is valid. But the canopy and covering isn't just for the EV owner. It's actually for the chargers, and it's actually for the EVs. So if you have a canopy or covering, say in a hot desert, right, now all of a sudden, not only are you in the shade, not only is the charger being protected from the sun, but when you're parked there, your car is also being protected from the sun, meaning you have less energy going to air conditioning. It's just a more comfortable, overall efficient stop. And then the same here with overhead lighting. With that, it's just really easy to get to a point. And of course, with the my new studio audience. Live studio audience. Oh. And then overhead lighting. This is really a security issue more than anything else, both for you as a person, but also for a vehicle, right? Like if you look at vehicles that get broken into, it's typically in poorly lit parking lots where people don't have, can't easily see what's going on. So, and then of course there's also for the chargers themselves. Again, this is something that kind of benefits the CPOs as much as it benefits EV owners, because it also decreases the likelihood of vandalism at these chargers. And then 24/7 bathroom access. This is one that I feel like is just a no-brainer. EVs, especially modern EVs, have gotten to the point where you are driving far enough between charging stops that the number one thing that you need to do when you stop is generally using the bathroom, right? So this is something where having a 24/7, and again, emphasis maybe on clean bathroom access is super important. And then, of course, trash cans. Again, this is just really getting to based on my thinking that traveling with an EV should be a similar experience to traveling with a a gas car, internal combustion car. And a lot of times when you're traveling, you're picking up trash along the way, whether it's you got food to go, or you took something with you that needs to be thrown out. Having trash cans available is huge, and it also just, in terms of beautification of the charging site, again, benefiting the CPO. Nothing's worse than showing up at a charging site and just seeing littered trash, right? And I firmly believe that most people are decent, reasonable people, and but sometimes lazy, right? So I don't think people are just throwing trash on the ground to throw trash on the ground. I think if you make trash cans easy and accessible, people will use them. So I don't know that it's a personality defect as much as it is just kind of laziness. And if a trash can isn't available, they're gonna make one. So, and then squeegees. Again, one of the things that you'll notice about owning an EV is that your use of windshield wiper fluid increases. And that's because most charging sites still lack squeegees. And so, unlike a gas car where you're regularly cleaning your windows when you pull in to fill up, well, now with an EV, you're having to rely on your windshield wiper fluid, or you're carrying your own squeegee. So just having a squeegee on site is just a super important amenity. On-site security, again, this is just a safety consideration, but it also feeds into the idea of, hey, look, if there's on-site security for whatever host business is hosting those chargers, it also means that you're less likely to encounter vandalism, less likely to encounter broken chargers or stolen cables. Cars won't be broken into, and you can generally feel safer using that charging site. Next is dining options. And again, we're getting to the point with these modern electric vehicles where your driving range is similar to the equivalent gas car, and only slightly less than that in between stops. And so now, probably every other stop, you're likely to be wanting to actually have a meal. So having dining options is great. And then after that, snack and drink options, again, you're generally going to want to fill up whatever beverage you have. Maybe a nice cup of Joe, or you just need to grab a snack, or you just want something to eat. Snack options, drink options, even if they're just a vending machine, is still better than not having anything at all. And then park, picnic, pet areas. I mean, these could actually almost be broken out, but these are also getting more common. But again, I've heard from a lot of people, a lot of EV travelers who say, hey, look, yeah, I mean, dining options, snack options are great, but I generally am traveling on a budget and I plan my trip. I bring my own food, right? I just need a place to eat. Again, with trash cans, things like that, it's nice. Have a place to walk your pet, and then get brutalized by them. But yeah, just having those things are just nice to haves. And then the last one is, again, novelty. It's kind of hard to fit this in as an amenity, and it's a sort of a catch-all, but it really is subjective based on, hey, look, are there local attractions? Are there gift shops? I know Iona and Rivian are really leaning into this too. And we're seeing this more where it's like, okay, maybe you don't necessarily, and this will be a topic maybe for another video, you don't necessarily want to make the charging site itself a location that you're visiting, right? You're not going out of your way to visit a charging station unless you're a crazy person like me. But along the way, having novelty at the different charging locations where you stop is a really nice thing to have. And that can be anything from gift shops to sightseeing to hiking trails to local attractions. So, yeah, and that closes out the amenities. Now, concentration, and I'll have to see if I can find. I have old Post-it note stickers where I was taking notes on possible names for these different categories. Concentration, but concentration is essentially just how many charging stalls are located in a single location, right? At a single charging site. And I wanted to call this out as a distinction from coverage, because I think coverage is talking about travel corridors and how well dispersed your charging sites are, where they're located along these different travel corridors. Whereas concentration is once you get to that charging site, how many chargers are located there. And this is in some ways kind of an offshoot of access, but there's other aspects of it as well, and there's a confidence building thing too. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of EV owners have been soured by poor reliability from some charging providers, and just not having the expected reliability, and so sort of demanding a higher charging stall count than they would normally to ensure that they have access, so they have a higher degree of confidence in that charging location. And so, just as a baseline, I think having 2 charging stalls is a bare minimum. Uh, you know, 8 years ago, 9 years ago, when I was first started traveling with a pure EV, a single charging stall, even in California, where a majority of EVs were being sold, once you got out of a major city, even a single charging stall was rarely occupied. Just a year or two after getting my Bolt EV, even 2 charging stalls in the middle of nowhere, you ran into a higher likelihood that at least one, if not both, of the charging stalls were occupied and in use. Sort of ironically, though, now that we've had some newer networks coming on with faster chargers, those 2 charging stall locations with the typically slower 50 kilowatt chargers are actually starting to open up a little bit more. So it's kind of that little bell curve now where I feel like the usage of the sites is actually reduced to the point that they're usable again, which is kind of ironic. But still, it's at a base level, it's just a single point for this. So 1 out of 10 ain't bad, but it's a failing grade. But you'll see why with this concentration category, that's not all there is to the story. So 4 stalls, and it's accumulative as you go. So 2 stalls, 1 point. 4 stalls will get points for both. Stalls will get points for all 3. 8 stalls will get points for all 4, and 10 stalls will get points for all 5. So it sort of snowballs. And by the time you get to 12 stalls, well, now, regardless of everything else, you're already a 6 out of 10. You're already above that middle average. And this is something that's sort of been validated. I did a poll with my viewers or subscribers. I just put it out on a community post. And a majority of people do seem to feel like 8 to 10 to 12 charging stalls is enough. And it really is sort of diminishing returns how much more confidence you have in a site after that point. So I've maintained for a while now that we don't need these massive charging hubs. You rarely see them as gas stations, and again, this is just my applying a similar standard to EV fueling as what has been applied to gas internal combustion fueling, where a majority, and in fact, I think the average gas pumps per gas station is somewhere around 8, right? It's like 6 to 8 gas pumps on average. They've been getting bigger recently, but you rarely ever see those massive. They're 1 out of 100 gas stations has uh, more than 12 to 16 gas pumps. So, um, yeah, I feel pretty confident in this that after 12 charging stalls, my preference for a CPO is that they start to look for new locations nearby to diversify, right? Rather than concentrating all of their chargers at a single location. It's cheaper for them to do that, but cheaper doesn't always equal the better customer experience. And then here, number of stalls appropriate for the site. This is where those two charger sites can start to get other bonus points, because if you're in the middle of nowhere, right, my local gas station 40, 50 miles from the interstate only has 2 gas pumps and it's not open 24/7, right? So the similar rules again apply to EV chargers. If it's just a sort of a remote outback location that's rarely used, but it's important to have just geographically, maybe 2 stalls is fine. Maybe 4 stalls is more appropriate for a small gas station. Maybe 8 or 10 or 12 stalls is more appropriate for a large travel plaza. So again, this also requires a bit of familiarity by the person doing this review to make sure they know how busy the site is. They use that location in theory. They can get a feel for whether it's appropriate. Same goes for the number of stalls in the route, right? Because a lot of the chargers that I see up here in Northern California, even along I-5, are generally 3, 4 charging stalls or chargers per location. And in rural Northern California, that might be appropriate. You get to Central California, especially along I-5, then things become a little bit different, where you're seeing enough traffic now where 6, 8, 10, or 12 really does need to be the standard. And so again, this is that familiarity with the route, right? Based on your knowledge of the travel route, are the stalls at that location appropriate? And then and so that's both the route and the region. Again, like California, heavy EV owning population, especially in Central and Southern California. You get to parts of California, Northeastern California, the number of EV ownership is very low, and the ability to charge at home is much higher. Maybe you can cut the average station size in half and it would still be appropriate for that region. And then the other one is, is a site supported by other sites from the same provider. And this is one that I did update. I think I originally had it at 20 or 30 miles or in the same town or city area. The reason I had it set at that, I believe it was 20 miles, is assuming a 10% arrival. Would you be able to get to another charging site in a 200-mile EV? I kind of updated this more to just align with the NEVI standard, which is they want chargers every 50 miles. And I think that is safer too. This assumption that people are going to be arriving at a site with less than 10% in an EV that only gets 20 miles of range at 10%, I think that's a little bit too limiting. Most EVs now are pushing past, 300 miles or 30 miles at 10%. And that's, again, if you arrive at 10%. I don't know if that's necessary. And then the other thing is, this is very specifically for the same provider in that region. So it's a bonus point for the provider adding coverage. I don't expect any single charging provider to be all-encompassing, right? We can't expect that. We need more charging providers in the game. So saying 50 miles between every charge point or every EV Go or every Sky Charger, that's fine, because the assumption is there's also going to be an electric era that's supplementing, or a Electrify America, or EV range. So like there's just all sorts of networks that you would expect, right? And Francis Energy is a regional provider, FPL is a regional provider. So whether it's a national or a regional provider, you would expect there to be multiple overlapping coverage, right? I've recently in Northern California, just going through the different charging providers who are adding. So we have a Pilot Flying J, and then we have a BP Pulse, and then we have a Mercedes high power charger, and they're all within 50 miles of each other on the freeway. That kind of coverage and overlap is, I feel like, enough that we can move the standard for a single charging provider to have another site within 50 miles. I think that's not too much to ask or too little to ask. Okay, and then the next section here, section 5, is location. This one is a little bit harder to define, but I think it makes sense when I describe it as basically just how important is this charging site, right? What does it add to the overall charging infrastructure? What does it add to that charging provider's network? So in a way, this can also be seen as coverage, but it's more about the importance of the site itself. And this has a strong leaning toward travel chargers. And this is, again, the bonus points category that I set up at the end is supposed to supplement this. And this is maybe the one that I need to work on the most, because what I found is the bonus points, I kind of aligned them to the existing sections. And spoiler alert, there weren't any for concentration or for location. And so maybe there's a way that we can get some bonus points related to city chargers, right? Is where I think is maybe the low-hanging fruit here. But just in terms of as a travel experience or supporting travel, is the site within 1 mile of a highway or an interstate? And I added highway here to put it on equal footing with interstates, because I feel like traveling highways is just as valid as traveling interstates at this point. I even sort of hearken back to my early days traveling with my Chevrolet Bolt EV. And in California, highways 99 and 101 were way more supported by public charging infrastructure, to the point that 350 mile stretch of I-5 between Sacramento and Los Angeles, basically there were no public chargers, right? There were only a few Tesla superchargers. They weren't open to the public at the time, and not a common standard, so on and so forth. So a majority of my traveling then, and I found even now, a majority of my traveling is done on highways. So I really do feel like inserting highway here at a sort of an equal level to an interstate is worth it. So so within a 1 mile of a highway or interstate, and this again snowballs. So is it within 1 mile? That's 1 point. Is it within half a mile of a highway or interstate? Again, if it qualifies for both, then that's 2 points. Within a quarter mile, that's 3 points. And then within several miles of a highway interstate, interchange or intersection. So this could be two major highways, this could be two major interstates. And the reason for that is it's almost like a free doubling up, right? If you're a charging provider and you want to cover Interstate 80 and I-5, right, Interstate 5, well, that cross section there becomes super important because you get both east-west travel and north-south travel. So within several miles, then again it snowballs within 1 mile of that highway interstate interchange or intersection, and then within half a mile. I don't know that being within a quarter mile is necessarily reasonable. They're interchanges and intersections for a reason, right? The idea is that, is it convenient enough to be used by travelers going in any of those directions? And then one more point for just, is it a historic or scenic highway route? And this is one of those things where I also understand that a lot of these historic or scenic highway routes aren't going to have chargers at all because they're oftentimes there aren't any businesses, right? You're talking about going through a remote scenic highway, which usually means that they're limited in the types of businesses and whatnot. And so a lot of times these are going to just be, is it located at the entrance or exit to that highway? So we see this a lot with Highway 1 going through Big Sur. You have chargers in, say, Monterey or down in Morro Bay, and then you can charge up before you head on this scenic highway route. So that, again, is another bonus point. And then is it more than 50 miles from the nearest public fast charger from any provider? And this, again, is getting to that, how important is this location? If it's more than 50 miles from the nearest other public fast charging provider, that's big, right? Because that means that, if you're traveling on a highway or an interstate and the next services are more than 30 to 40 miles away, there will generally be a sign on the highway or interstate saying, hey, look, if you need to gas up, do it now because the next stop after this, you could run out, right? And so if there's more than a 50-mile gap and a CPO is filling that gap, that makes their charging site important enough that it gets a bonus point for this. And then again, or gets a point for their location. And then again, is it in an incorporated area that has no other public fast chargers? And we have a lot of towns in the United States that don't have public fast charging. And most towns do have multi-unit dwellings, limited access to charging at home. Even if they're off the beaten path, having at least one public charging provider in pretty much every incorporated town in the United States is going to be super important. And then a lot of times what we see within cities is just underserved, or there just aren't enough chargers. And so this last point is it in an incorporated area with fewer than one public fast charging stall per 1,000 residents? Now, I updated this. I think I had put per capita, and that's technically the wrong term. And I didn't just come to 1,000 residents arbitrarily, right? I'm working from the assumption that somewhere between 20 to 30 to 40% of any car owning population in a city might not have easy access to charging at home or work. That means that they're going to need a public charging location. So just serving the needs of that community, if you think that they need to charge for 30 minutes per week on average to support their driving needs and commute, well, now you can start doing the math. Well, if it's 30%, right? That's 300 residents need to be using a charging stall 30 minutes, right, a day, or 30 minutes a week. So now all of a sudden you're talking about 150 hours a week that a particular charging stall will be occupied. That's a pretty high usage rate. So I feel like this is sort of the bare minimum, and it really illustrates how some of these larger cities with limited public charging, how far they fell behind. I know one example someone had mentioned was Jacksonville, Florida, where you're talking about a city of over 1 million people, and it only had a smattering of small charging sites. And if you were to use this metric with Jacksonville, they would have fallen far short, right? It means that you should have 1,000 DC fast charging stalls for a city of 1 million people minimum. And I think that's a reasonable metric. And so that's the section for location importance. All right, speed. Last category of the main categories. And speaking of speed, we're going to need to speed this up because I'm already pushing near an hour on the screen recording again. So speed is just, the peak charging speed available for the chargers in the charging site. And this has become more and more of an issue as EVs have gotten longer ranges, bigger batteries, worse efficiency, and as a result, in order for the amount of miles that you add in a given period of time, like 100 miles in 10 minutes or 200 miles in 15 minutes, whatever the case may be, that requires faster charging to support it. And I know for a lot of people, maybe they feel like this isn't as important. But if we're talking about ultimately EVs going mainstream and replacing internal combustion engine vehicles for all use cases, including heavy-duty towing, then we need to be paying attention to this, right? And so first and foremost, though, there's a subjective question. Is that peak charging speed appropriate for the venue or business, right? So a retail mall where people easily spend 2 or 3 or 4 hours, really not an issue. I mean, pretty much any charging speed is going to be okay, even, slower 24, 25 kilowatt chargers would be fine. And then the peak throughput is appropriate for the business or host. This gets back to like how powerful is the overall site, because are you talking about a travel plaza where you're churning through dozens of customers every 5 to 10 minutes, right? And if that's the case, then you really do need a powerful charging site that's able to provide high peak throughput for all of the EV owners who are using it, right? And then here, just this sort of, and again, a cumulative, this adds up point by point, and I updated it. This used to be 50 kilowatt as a baseline. I think at this point, 100 kilowatt should be that sort of standard baseline. And one of the justifications I used for it, I know people will push back on this, but at 200 amp, right, realistically, you're looking at 70 to 80 kilowatt charging rates. A majority of EVs on the road right now have 70 to 80 kilowatt hour battery packs. That means even if you're showing up bone dry, empty battery, in about an hour, you're pretty much charging to the point where your car is slowing down and not pulling peak power. So these are appropriate charging speeds for sit-down restaurants. They're a little bit slow for a dedicated travel charger, but that's why it's only 1 point. The 150 kilowatt charger actually do represent a big increase, and so you get 2 points for that. And then the 350 kilowatt now is the second to last, the penultimate charging experience here, where the 350 kilowatt used to be the gold standard. It's now been set back, but it's still worth 3 points if you're up to 350 kilowatt peak charging or greater, right? Because I do want to include I want to give credit to the 350 kilowatt chargers, but also sort of acknowledge the 400 kilowatt. And then the 500 kilowatt or greater peak charging speeds, that's sort of a head nod to the fact that Tesla V4 are on paper 600 kilowatt. The HYC 1000 Alpitronics that Mercedes and others are looking to install are going to be close to 600 kilowatt. But 500 kilowatt also gives credit to like ChargePoint's 500 kilowatts, right? It really is a bonus above the 350 to 400 kilowatt gold standard that we currently have. So acknowledging that on a 500 kilowatt charging speed or greater, right? So this is also looking at that 600. So it will get all of those 4 bonus point or 4 points for the speed. And then there's the last one is again cumulative, 4 sections. And this is just the throughput of the site, right? So you could have a 500 kilowatt site that's just a couple of, 150 kilowatt chargers, or like I guess on paper, maybe even a 300 kilowatt charger or whatnot. But the overall throughput, 500 kilowatt, that's sort of a baseline power level for a charging site, right? If you have, like I said, 400 to 150 kilowatt chargers at a location, you're already here, right? And that's sort of that baseline. The 1 megawatt or greater site power, now we're starting to get to those bigger charging sites. You're still going to see sites like the Pilot Flying J's most common distribution that are only 350 kilowatt split power chargers. They would fall in this sort of, they would fall below this category. And then the 2 megawatts is really, now we're starting to get to these major charging sites. And then 4 megawatts or greater is really sort of a head nod to these massive, those are usually those flagship sites. And so that's how you would get all 4 of those. And those have really massive throughput, can churn through a lot of EVs without them having to reduce power. All right, and then this last section is the bonus. Each one of these adds, right, I came up with 10 questions. 5 of them are amenities, 4 are access, and 1 applies or aligns to the speed. But these add to it, right? So it's not counted against the baseline score of 50. So this could be looked at as like an adjusted GPA or grading on a curve or whatever. So the first is just built-in adapters and multi-plug standard. Are they available? This seems like a no-brainer at this point. We're now coalescing around a single North American charging standard, but a lot of EVs that are sold are still CCS1, are CHAdeMO. Are there adapters available? Is there an easy way or Omniport or whatever for EV owners to not have to bring their own adapter and still be able to use the charger? Ideally, multiple standards, but built-in or available adapters also works. Charging stall status displayed. This is just a common, is there an indicator? ChargePoint's very good about this with their CPE 250s and their ChargePoint Express Plus, where it just shows on the charger what the status is. You could also have something subtle, just like a light indicator or LED. It just makes it easier when you're pulling into a charging site to know whether the charger is available, working, accessible. The charging station is indoors. Now this is an interesting switch. It's it's a bonus above and beyond a canopy, where yes, even the ones that are in a parking garage would count, but there's an opportunity here for charging providers to provide a true indoor climate-controlled experience. Ironically, one of the only ones is, one in New York and one in San Francisco, both fairly temperate most of the time. But this is a place where in really harsh weather conditions, these charging stations can shine, because guess what? You can refuel an EV even indoors, even in a climate controlled environment. Huge bonus here if we get to that point. And then CPO owns or leases the property. This has gotten a little bit of pushback since the new NEVI standard, but I do feel like there's some validity here. And the reason for that is that there is real tangible benefits for EV owners and drivers. And a lot of it has to do with not just the stability of whether that charging site is going to be, keep open. We've seen a lot of charging sites over the years have to close down and be torn out because the property lease ended. Not an ideal situation. But when the CPO also owns or leases the property, that's less likely to happen. But also the other interesting thing that happens here is it's just less likely that the chargers are vandalized, more likely that they're kept up and running, higher likelihood of reliability and support. Once these businesses start putting their own brand on these chargers and they are located at their site under their sort of corporate umbrella, then that experience, reliability should increase for EV owners. Yeah, and so after the CPO owning or leasing their own property, the next is another controversial bonus, which is a level 2 AC charging. Is it available on site? And I know this can be a contentious issue because I think it depends on the motives. And on one hand, from a CPO's perspective, these are really cheap to install, right? And they're highly reliable. The problem tends to be with the return on investment, I think. And honestly, I wonder how much of that is the level 2 AC standards fault itself, and how much of it has to do with the actual level 2 AC chargers that they are choosing to install, right? Because the new sort of AC standard is up to, it's what, 19.2 kilowatt, I think, technically, pushing 20 kilowatt. But you almost never see those. So even when you have these newer EVs with these much faster chargers available, even the more recent update to the Chevy Bolt EV and EUV, where they're basically having their 11.2 to 11.5 kilowatt onboard charger. Even finding a charger capable of that publicly, it was very hit or miss. And that's sort of important because when you're talking about now being able to charge an EV from empty to full in 4 to 6 hours, then it becomes a lot more compelling than the standard sort of 8 to 10 to 12 hours or longer that a lot of the public AC charging currently does. And again, to me, it comes back to the use case of the location. And one thing that we also have to remember is we're starting to see more EV conversions. We're starting to see more EV restorations, vehicles that don't necessarily have DC fast charging. This is a great option for them. We're starting to see more hyper efficient EVs. In particular, we're starting to see more e-bikes and things of that nature. Sometimes they do have the DC standard available, but a lot of times they only have level 2 or AC charging. But because of how efficient they are and how small their battery is, even on AC charging, 30-minute to a 45-minute charge might be all that they need. So for some applications, these are still as effective or as important as DC fast charging. And then, of course, plug-in hybrids, a lot of EV enthusiasts sort of feel like they're a step backward. I'm not going to argue with that. I don't think that they're necessarily where we want to be going as an industry. But at the same time, um, there are a lot of plug-in hybrids out there. Level 2 AC does support them. And I think for me, the single most compelling reason to add AC charging, well, before I start with that, I think one of the main counter arguments, and this one I do agree with, is, well, first I'm going to straw man, then steel man, then straw man, right? So there's an argument about level 2 AC charging being more reliable than DC fast charging. I think at one point in time that might have been true. I think overall level 2 AC is still just generally more reliable. It's essentially just a power feed to your car, right? It's a pretty hard one to screw up. But the idea that it is a valid alternative to DC charging, I don't think is sound, right? Because, we had a recent discussion on Coast to Coast EVs. Landon was from Arkansas EV Traveler, was talking about the Walmart Energy, why they chose not to do level 2 AC. And he brought up a very good point too of, even if you're someone who doesn't have access to charging at work or home and you're relying on public chargers, how often are you going to be using level 2 AC? And I can tell you, as someone who's personally experienced that, almost never, right? When I had my Chevy Volt, I mean, I still have it, but when I had it without charging at home or work, I can count on one hand the number of times I even bothered plugging it in, because level 2 requires you to be at a particular location generally for longer than you would normally be there. And it just wasn't necessarily worth that benefit. And it certainly doesn't replace a DC fast charger. So the one area, though, that I would push back, and I would say that the most valid reason for including level 2 AC charging at these sites is these DC charging sites are almost always located at businesses. And that means those businesses have employees. Those employees might want to drive an EV, and those employees might not have the ability to charge at home. That makes these the perfect location for those employees to be able to drive an EV, to commute in an EV, to buy an EV and use it, and have the same seamless experience that people who can charge at home have, and other people who can charge at work. So I feel it's worth a bonus point, and I think that charging providers need to be cognizant of the potential for employees to want to use level 2 AC charging at a given business where they're working that happens to host a DC fast charging site. All right, so the next question here, bonus question, is on-site battery. And this is one that's a little bit weird because it doesn't necessarily have an immediate or apparent benefit to EV owners, but I think you can see subtly where it would. And that on-site battery is very subtle in the sense that it's mostly there for shaving peak demand, but that lowers the CPO's costs, which means that in theory they can pass those savings on to EV drivers, right? It also reduces oftentimes their overall installation costs, because they now can get into a location with maybe an existing power drop, or maybe they can put in a much larger charging site and not require an upgrade to the grid or an upgraded transformer or a larger transformer than you would need otherwise. again, this is sort of Electric Era's claim to fame, is they're able to get into these charging sites really quickly. Like their turnaround time for building and powering up these charging sites are really, really short because they're incorporating an on-site battery. That on-site battery reduces the size of the transformer, the power drop, the impact on the grid, and then allows them to pass that savings on to their customers. But also there's another thing too. We're seeing a rise in time of use pricing, and some of it can be very penalizing. And on-site batteries pretty much eliminate the need for time of use pricing schedules, because as far as that site is concerned, they're going to mostly be recharging that battery during off-peak times, and that's going to allow them to essentially subsidize the cost of electricity during those peak times. And in fact, with the smarter batteries, they're even able to feed in that excess power during peak times, that they can make that arrangement with the public utility, and in theory maybe sell their power for more than a commercial person could sell, a residential person could sell their power back to the power company. So there's a lot of opportunities here where the EV owner isn't going to see necessarily a direct connection. They're just going to know that maybe they're paying less to charge, or they're just having more consistent pricing, and it's going to be thanks to something like an on-site battery. Likewise, another bonus question, and this was, again, like the completely indoor charging site, this is sort of broken off from the canopy or covering. Because the main benefit in terms of amenities for a charging site is having that canopy or covering to protect the chargers, to protect the car, to protect the driver. The canopy itself doesn't necessarily need to be solar, but there is a benefit to having on-site solar. And I know that a lot of CPOs have mentioned how minimal that is. It's really based on the location, the geography, the sun exposure, the peak sun hours, the types of solar that they install, but also how much, the CPO themselves can make use of that. And properly deployed solar, properly used and deployed by the CPO, can have significant benefits, and they are similar to those same benefits of having an on-site battery, where now all of a sudden EV owners are going to see preferential rates maybe during what would normally be peak times or peak costs. And we've also seen even with Tesla with their Oasis, right, in Lost Hills, they set up a charging site where they weren't going to get sufficient power from the utility, but because they paired it with on-site solar, it opened up options to them that weren't available before. I've used charging sites where there were extremely low power drops, and they paired them with solar power, and they were able to put in DC fast charging in a location where they didn't think that they were going to be able to, along Highway 101, some of the rest areas. Was it, I think, north of Los Robles, I think? I'll have to go and check on the status of that charging site. But yeah, having that on-site solar really opens up opportunities, and it's a benefit directly and indirectly to the EV driver, even when that solar isn't necessarily set up as a canopy. And then another one is this is separate from security, right? But just having on-site support staff. And this kind of ties into, is the CPO the owner-operator? But just having on-site staff, maybe there should be a bonus point if they're available 24/7. But in terms of just making sure that the chargers are up and running, escalating issues. It just it also adding confidence, right? So you see the Gravity charging site in New York has a full-time staff there. It just it's something that adds to the experience. And then I've heard from people talking about, oh well, if someone is disabled, they have difficulty lifting a cable, maybe they're getting on in years, right? There was an argument about standards, which I don't think is very valid, right? Anybody who's used a V1 supercharger cable will attest to the fact that the Tesla plug itself isn't inherently easier to handle than CCS or CHAdeMO. A lot of it has to do with the cable and cable management. But outside of those, I think less than honest criticisms of having to lift heavy cables, there are people who will need assistance, and having on-site support staff and the ability to just ping someone to come over and help you out, maybe help you with billing, maybe help you understand how things work, that it's worth a point, right? And then the next one that's probably again going to be a bit controversial is the site oversubscribed or not, right? And in this case, not being oversubscribed is what gets you the bonus point. And the reason for it is it can be kind of jarring if you show up as site and you're expecting 150 kilowatt, 250 kilowatt, 350 kilowatt power, and you plug in and you're not getting that advertised rate. And this happens where charging providers feel that it's more important to maximize the stall count, even if that means exceeding the power capabilities of the site, or even just of the hardware itself. And so again, not to pick on Tesla, but they're probably the number one example of this, where all 4 of their V3 stalls, right, is fed off of a single 360 kilowatt cabinet. And that means that the moment a second driver gets into that 4 stall configuration, now neither driver is going to see the peak kilowatt. And of course, they do very good power sharing, and they usually use more than one 360 kilowatt cabinet. So it obfuscates it a little bit, but it's the same experience. Once a V3 site is more than 50% full, no one is going to be seeing their peak power unless most of the people there are way along in their charging curve. And Electrify America is also kind of guilty of this with their balance power. So now they have 2 chargers, both say 350 kilowatt on them, but if one of them is in use, now the other one is not 350 kilowatt. And so I do want to differentiate this, though. This is not talking about a 350 kilowatt charger that splits power, because the charger itself says it's 350 kilowatt, like the EVgo Delta. So it stands to reason, if the charger is 350 kilowatt and 2 people plug in, they should be seeing a combined total of 350 kilowatt, but they shouldn't both expect to be seeing 350 kilowatt at the same time. So a lot of this has to do with transparency with the consumer, right? And making sure that they're getting what is advertised. But more so, it's also focused on the site itself, and can the power drop even manage the full power that all of the chargers are going to be asking for. And in some cases, we see that is not actually what's happening. So this is just basically making sure that the site is right-sized in terms of the power drop and the number of chargers. And if necessary, sure, they can supplement it with a battery backup an additional inverter, that they can actually feed power beyond what the grid drop can handle. And then the last one is just simple Wi-Fi, pretty easy. Not everyone's playing Royal Kingdom, so yeah, I feel like I've seen that ad way too many times. But yeah, so Wi-Fi available to guests. If you're there charging, you should be able to use Wi-Fi. A lot of these charging providers are using web-based portals now, app-based portals. Just have Wi-Fi available, right? It's not too much to ask, and it is worth a bonus point. And then just to close out, just any sort of additional, descriptions, letting people know what the charging hardware maker is. You can upload a file. I think it's limited to images, and then just 10 images of the site, up to 10 megabytes. I think in theory you could add video, but that opens up a can of worms. So nothing there. So I don't know. Maybe it's the Kitty Studio. They've lost interest now. But it feels like it was even longer recording this time. So hopefully you all stuck around and found it interesting enough. And then hopefully my screen capture actually worked the way it was supposed to work this time, and I didn't just waste an hour of my time. And hopefully I didn't waste an hour of your time. So yeah, let me know what you think. And then of course I'm going to be rolling this out with a few different charging site reviews, and a number more charging site reviews to come in the future. I think I'm going to stick to this format too for doing the charging site reviews sort of in absentia. As I'm talking through a charging visit, my camera work gets a little bit shaky. It's easier to record higher quality B-roll, take notes, then sit down and then explain it. So like I said, I'm not budging on the idea of I want to have used a charging site. I want to have experienced it before I'm going to do a charging site review. So when I say in absentia, it's after the fact, after I've had a chance to use the charging site, see how it works for myself, make sure everything's in place, make sure I know all of the details, not just what's listed on PlugShare, which can sometimes be inaccurate, or even what the charging providers themselves put on their websites can sometimes be inaccurate. And then, of course, they don't always cover some of the other qualitative aspects of the charging site that really, to me, kind of give those charging sites the most value. Anybody can put hardware in the ground, but what's the overall experience of getting to the site, using the site, experiencing the site, seeing the hardware, seeing the surroundings, seeing the businesses firsthand? That's sort of invaluable, and I think that's where these charging site reviews kind of go above and beyond just a simple check-in or just a simple numbers on a sheet. So anyway, let me know what you think, and if you made it this far, thank you for watching, and I'll be checking out of the Cat Scratch Studio. And again, this will also be published on the newsletter on Substack, so if you can, check it out. I'm going to be making sure that I'm putting at least 3 to 4 articles a week up, some longer, some shorter, just doing what I can. And as always, thank you for watching.